Welcome to the Parenting Thoughts podcast with Andy and Christie Kirk, where we want to dive into the emotional, spiritual, and practical elements of parenting. We want to get curious around these thoughts and just around practical elements and talk through some topics where today, in particular, Christie, we're going to be talking all about emotion coaching.
Yes, we are.
Very good. Well, emotion coaching is a new term, I guess, in the last few years that I've heard emerging. Can you start by just explaining for those watching, those that are listening, what is emotion coaching?
Emotion coaching is understanding that we all have emotions. Obviously, we have emotions as parents and our kids have emotions. And I guess it's a place of understanding that with those emotions, they're not negative emotions, but understanding that there's always more to the story with emotions.
Right.
So it's about helping our children to regulate their nervous systems and get curious about their emotions rather than just be upset with the way they're reacting.
Yeah, right. I like that word, and we used it in the opening here about getting curious. What does it look like to be curious about your emotions? I'm curious if I've got emotions. So no, we all do. But curious about emotions, that's a good term. Like it's diving in and sitting in your feelings and knowing how different things make you feel.
Yeah.
What do you mean by curious?
I think it's understanding that emotions have layers. So if you were to look at it from the perspective of like an iceberg, so when you see an iceberg, you see what's on top of the surface.
Right.
And for a lot of us as parents and for ourselves and for our children and just emotions in general, we see what like small elements of the emotion, and usually it's the reactive side of the emotion, like it's these big feelings that we're seeing. And so understanding with emotion coaching is that there's depth to that emotion. So even with anger, for instance, anger is a secondary emotion.
Right.
So what's under anger? And it's like the iceberg. So there's the top of the iceberg that we see, but then what's under that? Like there's more depth to that emotion. There's more of a story. There's a narrative that's created. So emotions come in and out of the body within 90 seconds.
Right.
And so it's realizing that the reason why they stay in our bodies is because there's a narrative that's attached to that emotion.
Yes.
So as parents, it's just not seeing the outward or seeing that top part of the iceberg, but going, okay, let's get curious about the emotion. Let's ask about the emotion. Let's understand the story behind the emotion. Obviously, for toddlers, it's a guessing game. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's for different ages. Obviously, there's different elements of emotion coaching.
Yep.
Often with little children, it's about regulating ourselves first. A lot of emotion coaching is learning that we're being triggered by our child's behavior.
Yep.
How do I regulate myself first? How do I calm myself first? And then attend to my child and be able to support their needs.
Yeah, that's brilliant. When using the word regulation, so how do we as parents effectively teach children how to be regulated, how to regulate their emotions, how to feel their emotions, to understand them? So if we're talking to parents here today and they're listening, and they might be hearing this for the first time, how do they embark on this to teach their children in this space around regulating their emotions?
Yeah, well, I think it's and this is hard because it's like, it's my kid's emotion. They've got their big emotion, but really they're looking to us for calm. Yeah. And oftentimes with big emotions, we can go into our child's chaos where it's actually stopping, breathing, taking time for yourself and realizing, why is this affecting me first?
Right.
And helping regulate myself and then supporting your child.
Yes.
And I think what's really important to understand too is that we have mirror neurons. Yeah. And so our child will mirror our reactions and responses and we will mirror theirs. So if they've got these big emotions and we're coming into their chaos, we're almost like, it's like the brain fires up and we're like mirroring each other. Yes. And so what a child needs.
Starts to escalate.
Yeah, exactly. And so what a child needs is to go, my parent is coming into this place calm. And I often explain it to parents this way, is that you can't teach a child to swim when they're drowning.
Right.
So it's like, don't try and come into the chaos and try and have this life lesson in this learning moment, when right now we just need to calm the body, allow some space, and then oftentimes that learning experience or that place of understanding what's going on for them comes later.
Yes.
And oftentimes as parents, we just try, it's got to be a teaching moment right now. It has to be dealt with right now. But really, for both parent and child, it's often better to take some space and to have a moment and just go, okay, I've got to come back to this. Right now, my priority is to bring calm into this situation.
So for us, is the teaching part of a parent's urgency to bring the teaching in more for us sometimes to be right, and then it's well-intentioned, but we have to dive in and it's a teaching moment because you're trying to correct the behavior, but that's again just the top of the iceberg.
Yeah.
So where they're trying to correct, because next time they're just going to remember this, but really that big chunk below of emotions is what needs to be sorted first.
Yeah, definitely.
So practically speaking, you come in, you bring calm, you bring comfort. Do you loop back around later and go, hey, do you remember, in a much calmer space?
Definitely. I think it's kind of like closing the loop type thing. You know what I mean? So it's in the sense of like, I'm not sitting here saying that the behavior shouldn't have a conversation or there shouldn't be a discussion. And yes, there's appropriate ways that we behave in certain areas. Like I completely understand that, but it's more so about what's the kindness that I can bring into this situation initially and realize that sometimes that learning moment comes next. And the reason why is because when a child is having a big emotion, what we talk about in counseling is that the brain is switched off at that moment. So at the point of like they're out of their window of tolerance. And so they're not learning much in that point. It's like the brain has to be able to find the calm to be able to understand the logic of what a parent is trying to say. It's almost like when they're in that big emotion, it's like, you know, and often like, you know what this is like, well, not just you, but like me as well and everybody. It's like when you're having a big emotion, it's hard to have input come in at that point. You have to actually find some space and go, okay, what is the situation?
Oh no, I love it when I'm all emotional and you just want to correct. I love that aspect. I take it all in.
Yeah, you do.
I know what you're saying. It's true. Your emotions up and that lid is just closed. I'm not taking in on any information right now. You're talking about this for children, but you started off saying, hang on a minute, often the regulation starts with the parent. This takes discipline for a parent. This takes discipline to be the bigger person, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's just as much as we need to be curious about our child's emotion and what's happening for them, we have to realize what's happening for us. You know, like, why is this behavior affecting me? Like, and I mean, counseling's fun because you can delve into all of those types of things for yourself. Oftentimes it relates to some of our triggers and our traumas that we've experienced in our past, or the way that we were parented, or, you know, even like having to hush behaviour. Like back in the day, it was like children are seen and not heard. So it's like, you know, it's about understanding that what's happening for me on the inside for me, like what is going on for me and how can I get curious about my emotions and why is this behavior actually upsetting me? Was I hushed in certain areas of my life, you know, and now I feel like I've got to do that with my child, or, you know, like I think so it's just understanding that in those situations, it's both the child and the parent's emotions. And your emotions are just as important in that situation, because once you get curious and you calm your emotions, then you can deal with that when your brain's back online. Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
Yeah.
We're physical, emotional, and spiritual beings. How does emotion coaching fit in with faith in God? Because I think some of our listeners would be hearing, and those that are watching start to think, well, that's all good. You've got emotions on this side. We've got God on this side. And I know there's a lot of education, a lot more people speaking about the integration of all aspects of us as a whole being, a lot more. But I still think there's an element of where we do separate our emotions from God, and even our emotions, we don't filter through God. So how does this work all in together?
There's a saying that says, if you don't transform then you'll transfer. And so I think that's a big thing when it comes to parenting. And like the Bible talks a lot about this, where it really talks about taking captive of your thoughts and transforming the way that you think and realigning it with the word of God. And I think that obviously everyone has experiences in life. Everyone's been through past trauma or, things that may have affected them. And so it's about identifying some of those things so that you can allow God to come into those spaces and be vulnerable and allow yourself to, maybe it would be heal, maybe it would be process, maybe it would be curious about your emotions so that you can help support your child when they're going through a hard situation. So it's like taking captive of those thoughts, but also being able to realign and do things in a new way. Like God has called us to do things in a new way and be transformed in that sense. And I think if we don't transform, we'll transfer. And so it's like whatever you're dealing with and whatever you're going through emotionally or things that you've got going on, you have to have awareness of that. Otherwise, that will literally come out in your children subconsciously.
Yeah. I've read the research says by the age of 8 or 9, our emotional patterns are set. And once those emotional patterns are set, our subconscious mind, we go through teenager, and now as adults, we are on autopilot subconsciously to some of these things that were formed back in childhood that's now prohibiting us within our spiritual walk with God. Can you speak into even a little bit further into that? You're saying the renewing of our mind and the transforming. How does that coexist there? That because I think some of the prohibitors really are that we can feel guilty about how we feel, shame, different emotions, but then that stops that intimacy with God. What would you say to someone that's really struggling in that area?
Well, I think it's understanding that one of the greatest things where we find like we're not good enough or we struggle as adults is often because there has been a disconnect in attachment to a caregiver or there has been a break in relationship or, a turbulent relationship or whatever that looks like. And I think even when you have the understanding of the concept of attachment as like a parent and like a caregiver and a child, it really impacts your relationship with God. Because that's a deep, intimate connection and attachment with a Heavenly Father. But if someone hasn't had an experience with their Father that has been intimate or guidance or caring or even a nurturer of a mother, then it does impact your ability to see God as like, it's a directive God, like it's like it's rule-based, like you're doing the wrong thing or, so it's really understanding like, your emotions and the way that you have had attachment is important to identify because it does impact that relationship with God and the outworking of that relationship with God. And there may be some barriers that God wants to help you identify so that you can have that relationship with your child that maybe you didn't have with your caregiver. And it's,
I've heard you teach and talk about that as parents, we need to be bigger, stronger, wiser.
Yes.
What would you say for the parents are really, as we're building out this emotional coaching and emotion regulation for the children, what would be the steps for them next to take in this particular area around that, being bigger, stronger, wiser? I love that.
Yeah, I like at Circle Security. It's a research all about parenting and the way that we parent, and it's being that secure base for your child. So the preface of it is to understand that children are filled with wonder and discovery and, they're not supposed to be quiet and contained and, which is like our natural inclination is to control, and I think so it's like when we're dealing with our kids, it's like we want them to act and do a certain ways because that affects us either publicly or perception or whatever that looks like. And so I think it's just more understanding that like, we have this place of nurturing that, but also being able to put steps around it. So what would that look like? I would look at it like a balloon. So there's so many different things that we experience in our life, so many different stresses, so many elements of our life, and that can get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's two ways for that to go down. It's either going to pop, which is what kids do or we do, or it can slowly, incrementally the air be left out in that sense of like being able to regulate ourselves, calm ourselves and understand that our child's important, we're important, and there's just ways that we can naturally do that.
Yeah.
And you have to find out what works for you.
Yeah.
You know, you have to find out what makes you feel calm, what makes you be able to bring back, like we were talking about, that full circle. Maybe it's saying sorry.
Yeah.
One of the big things that we're finding in research and understanding about parenting is that one of the ways that we can do is actually say sorry to our children. You know, like, I want to do better. And then it teaches our kids, like, I can do better. You know, I can have this big mistake or this big emotion, but it doesn't mean that I have to stay there. I can actually help reduce that and help, I guess, calm that space.
Yeah. And that's really being bigger, stronger, wiser in those circumstances.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And exactly. So bringing it back to that is that protection and that calm base. And like I said before, it's like, as emotion coaching is really bringing calm into chaos.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that's the thing, that, as you're saying, being bigger, stronger, and wiser as a parent. Thinking about that in every interaction with your child. Like, how do I be the bigger, stronger, wiser person in this situation? Like, we can't expect our child to have this same emotional understanding that we have as adults.
Right.
And I think sometimes it's like, you know, just do better. Like, well, how? You know, like, how do I do that? You know, like, you can't do that.
Yes.
You know, sometimes it's like, you've had this big emotion, or like, you know, they've seen their parents have this big emotion, but it's always that full circle. It's like understanding that I can be bigger, stronger, wiser, and bring calm into this chaos. Yeah. But then I'm also teaching my child that mistakes happen, and I can say sorry, and I can bring that back into a full circle and regulate myself as well.
So that was super helpful, Christie. Just some of those points that you have just started to unpack there around the emotion coaching. But just as we close out our time here on the podcast, can you summarize and just give the parents listening and also watching just some real key takeaways that they can take with them?
Key takeaways is that we all have big emotions.
Yes.
We get to regulate ourselves first and then help bring the calm into our child's chaos.
Yep.
I think one of the other things that was really good is to understand that the ways that we can practically do that is to notice our child's behavior, notice their big emotion, help them to process that emotion by naming the emotion, and then also looking at the unmet needs. So like, why is my child responding like this? What is the biggest story? Understanding that iceberg of going, okay, it's not just about what I'm seeing externally, but there's more of a narrative to understanding that there's a lot more to that situation.
Brilliant. Well, parents, I hope that was very helpful for you, those that are joining us watching or those that are listening. Next month, we're going to be looking at the 7 C's of parenting. And so we hope you can join us then. And we look forward to having us on the Parenting Thoughts podcast with Andy and Christie Kirk.
This is a Poly Studios production.